Good. Good.
So, good morning. I'm with Colin Kennedy. This is the Insights channel. Colin is the author of the upcoming book, How to Win Hearts and Minds in the World of the iBrain. What an intriguing title.
Good morning.
What's the iBrain?
The iBrain. I was walking down Queen Street in fact, I just finished a speaking assignment, and I came out of the hotel, and I just noticed everybody was walking around with their phones in front of them, almost like there were these invisible tendrils connected to them and their phones, and everybody was doing it. And so I wanted to research a little bit more, and I wish I could say the iBrain was my word for it, but I read it in some scientists in Scientific American calling this the age of the iBrain. And so I think people are becoming very preoccupied with data and technology, and what this means for humans and for communication. The reality, though, that as human beings, we're never going to change. We're still fundamentally human. And although some things will change, some behaviors and habits, there's still the humanity in us, and that's still the highway to communication. And in some respects, the iBrain is, or the whole technology thing is, we shouldn't let it distract us from the reality of human communication, if you like. So that's kind of where it's going. And as humans, we think we need to be convinced in two areas. We need to be convinced in our rational, logical, factual brain, and in the emotional brain. So we need to connect with both in order to be sort of moved into action. And you often hear people sort of saying, statistics or facts, or, emotional connections and storytelling, and one or the other. In fact, they can't work separately. They work hand in hand. It's about communicating with people at that human level, even despite technology.
So where does insight fit into this? Well, let me start. So what does insight mean to you?
I think insights are those brief flashes of clarity that you get about something, those aha moments, when you sit up and realize, gosh, actually that's an interesting thought, or it's a realization about something. Those moments, I guess, of clarity when things fall into place and make sense. If that makes any sense.
well, of course it does. One of the things we're talking about in the book is that insight is an innate capability of all human beings. And you spoke about, I think you're talking about human connection. And insight seems to be one of those components, but it seems to be somehow tied with feeling as well. Is that your experience?
I think so. If you look at what I'm about, I'm about helping people to persuade and influence, to get action out of people. Whether that's to influence them to accept a concept, or to, buy a product or a service, or be moved to take action, like, quitting smoking or something. We all need to get these messages across in ways that make, that get action, that get change. And so in some ways, what I'm talking about is how you can communicate in order to spark insight in somebody else. So what we want your audience doing is going, oh, now I get it.
The aha.
The aha moment, yeah. And, to me, that's what insight is. But how do you get people to insight? So for a lot of us, it sometimes happens by means of this process of random inputs, stuff we read, stuff we've learned, our life experiences applied to a problem, and out of that comes perhaps an insight. But you don't know what you don't know, so communicators are trying to get people to take action that might be good for them. Cut out sugar, for example. So how do you get people to cut out sugar, to get the insight and the realization that, oh gosh, maybe I'm addicted to sugar and, it's not good for me. How do you get them to that point? And that's sort of what I'm about, is, maybe about communicating insight, if you like. And that takes both a rational and an emotional connection to achieve.
Oh, can you tell me more about that? We're talking about, I grew up in a very rational world. My background as a management consultant, we're delivering rational outcomes, but there seems to be a role for feeling or emotion or something else in there as well. So to just focus on feeling doesn't seem to be quite right. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we need both. The rational mind needs to be convinced as well as the emotional mind, and that may be in part due to our own decision making, but sometimes we need to justify our decisions to other people. So you might really want to go out and buy that new car. And
how did you know?
Just see you down at the
there are people I need to convince.
But you're sort of thinking, oh, I really want to drive that car because it makes me look, I look good in it. I feel good driving it. It's got so much power, and I really need it because I have to, I have to spend so much time in the car every day. I might as well, make it a good experience. But then you think in the background, my wife, she might not sort of think that's such a good idea.
How come you're reading my mind?
Well, exactly. That's the case. And so you need to convince her. She's not going to have the same emotional ties to that car that you are. So you need some logical reasons as well, just even to justify it to yourself, to your own argument. So you'll always find you've got that debate going on, the pros and cons. There's the emotional reason, and there's also the rational, logical reason. So that's hearts and minds. The heart's the emotion, and the minds is the rational, the statistics side of things, I guess, or the facts, or the logic.
I'm going to dig a bit deeper with you because you may not be aware of this, but it's something that I've observed. Your background is as a journalist and in content marketing. The other day you were talking about the components of the book and what you were looking at, and to me that was very insightful. So I was looking to you as someone who is a professional at drawing insights or finding out things that the best definition I'm running with at the moment is that an insight is a truth that's self-evident in retrospect.
Mm-hmm.
So it was always there, and the most insightful people seem to have an ability to draw out something that's underlying. But the question is, are you doing this consciously?
I often wonder about that myself, because you often hear the advice that, well, you have to systemize things and you have to scale and you have to teach other people how to do it. And you're sort of thinking, well, how do I teach anybody about what goes on in my mind when sometimes I don't even understand what goes on in my head? And I guess maybe there are some tools that help you find insight, if you like. The interview is one, and I think curiosity is another, and having a really diverse taste in the different kinds of content you consume is also important towards insight. I think, if you read everything with an open mind, you watch, even fiction, documentaries, whatever it is, just read widely, consume lots of different types of content. So I have lots of different things I'm interested in. And, I think that sometimes helps you to insight, because it kind of gives you, I guess, a grasp of some of the smaller details and some of the bigger details as well. I enjoy everything from PlayStation to history to religion to woodworking to, time management and productivity and psychology and all of these sort of things. So I've always had a really curious mind. And I had a boss accuse me when I was in my early 20s of having a short attention span. And that's just because my mind was, always moving onto different things. Almost like, I guess, a bee goes from flower to flower gathering pollen. I think maybe, that's probably a good analogy for it. It's this kind of pollination process that leads to insight, maybe.
I'm just thinking of my school reports, and I've mentioned this before. Did they say if only Colin could settle down and focus? Then
a lot of times, yeah. The headmaster wrote on my report once, Colin is only motivated by the things which interest him. And I remember thinking, but isn't everybody? And I think he was ruining a lack of discipline in that, if I wasn't interested in mathematics, then I had no time for it. But no, it was always just curious about everything.
I was having a discussion with someone who I'll be interviewing in the next couple of days, and we were wondering about this curiosity, or we were talking about an innate ability to be insightful, a basic human thing. And then we're wondering why we lost it, because that seemed to be the very definite feeling that we are insightful, but there seemed to be some things that were acting against it or getting in the way. And one of the things we were thinking of was the school system.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to understand, what did the headmaster want?
Yeah.
To be motivated by things that you weren't interested in? Is this what we're being?
Yeah, in some ways, I think he made me consider things, and sometimes I've applied my mind to things that I'd sooner run from, just because it's there and it sort of needs investigation. And I'm not sure the school system is really to blame for the loss of insight. I think the school system can help it. I mean, I was interviewing a person who is what did he call himself? He called himself a data artist or a data artist. So he takes big data, I always get the pronunciation wrong, and he turns it into artworks. And he works for the Smithsonian. So he's basically the innovator or data in residence at the Smithsonian in the US, and he was sort of saying that the whole thing with a library is that it's a very what is the word he used the word serendipitous experience. So when you're in a library, you've gone there for a certain thing. Maybe with your interest in the whole insight thing, you're heading towards a book about insight or insights or an autobiography or something. But on the way, you pass a book about geography, or a section on geography or a section on cooking. And a title there might catch your eye. And so you're distracted to go down and explore that book or that section or that interest. And I think schools can help the serendipitous process if your teachers encourage that inquiring mind, if you're spending time in the library, and there's all these diverse subjects, so it's not so much this. Maybe maybe it's the teachers who help towards insight, or unhelpful towards insight. But I think schools in themselves can be a very serendipitous place where you can learn so much about life and dynamics. So I think we lose it because we're creatures of habit, and we like our patterns and our routines and our habits, and we get into those habits and we don't get out of them. You get up at a certain time in the morning, you have your breakfast, whatever's quick and easy because you're in a hurry. You get in the car, you drive the same way to work every day because it's the most efficient. You do your work, you come home. So we fall into these routines, and we come home, we're tired. It's been a long day. You've got bills to worry about. You've got kids, sports and activities to worry about. So we get caught up in life, and we stop being curious. We stop being stimulated by just random things because we don't have time for it. You don't have time to pause and check out the cooking book, or to check out the book about, technology, because you've only got 10 minutes and you need to grab what you need to grab.
Yeah, what's that about? I'll ask a bit, actually I'll ask a bit more in depth. One of the drivers behind the book, is about insights. And there are quite a few techniques or approaches that I would call insightful. They are designed to develop a deeper understanding of the issue. For example, design thinking which I've done some work in, it is a process for innovation, a process for creativity, and my experience of it, it's very useful. Agile is another thing that we look at, which is making small incremental steps. So admitting at the start that you don't know, and so therefore it's a process of incrementally expanding your knowledge. This to me is insight, understanding more deeply. They are fantastic and effective tools. And I was talking with a consulting company, and they're saying, this is a great tool. So why aren't your customers using it? For example, I'm hearing Agile now becoming more mainstream, but it's been going for 15 years, I think. And only now this useful tool, and its mindset is a I don't know mindset. So I'm curious to find out, fantastic stuff. So I sort of asked him, I actually asked a group of people on this, so why don't your customers implement this? And the first thing they said was, well, in general, they're too busy.
Mm.
That was a long question to a simple thing. What's this busyness about?
I don't think a lot of us have much choice. Life is tough. It's fast paced. There's lots of demands on us for attention. And, I think most people are just trying to get through the day, get done what needs to be done, focus on the necessities. I read some research a few years ago that found that when we walk, we're actually walking. This was back then, and this was a good, 5-10 years ago. We were walking 10% faster than we had been walking 10 years previously. So by now, we might be walking 20% faster than we did 20 years ago. And that just kind of shows that pace of life in a real physical form. And so we stop being curious. There's those really trite sayings like stop and smell the flowers, or stop and smell the roses or something. That's true. It's just about being curiosity, or just about being curious. And I think, what I quite like as a recent development is the whole mindfulness thing, which I really enjoy. And exercise, just going for a long walk and being mindful, being in the moment. I think those things are really useful because they force us to stop and observe the world around us. And I think that's where insight comes from. I think insight is a product of curiosity as well as life experience and the things we've learned. being applied to a problem.
So in your book, which you're talking about this iBrain world, which I understand is always on, a huge amount of data, and dare I say, a huge amount of stimulation. You know, it's something we choose to do, but you're saying that we need to access our hearts as well. And so what have you found out? What's the secret?
Access our hearts as well, yeah. You know, it's one of the things that the Scientific American reported on was that our brains do alter and change to some extent. And when last, for example, if I ask you a question, when last did you bother to memorize a telephone number?
I'll tell you what came up was my number from my childhood home.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's interesting because we've got our phones, so we don't need to memorize things. So you kind of wonder, is that a faculty that's going to be exercised less and maybe start to disappear? So things like that possibly change because tools make things easier for us, and we're always looking for the easy way out. That's you know, maybe insight comes from trying to find the easy way out as well. I think that's a very human thing, is we're always looking for when I went to the Global Speaking Summit earlier this year, one of the speakers, I think it was Brad Hock, said people buy shortcuts. And I thought that was very insightful. You know, we're always looking for shortcuts. So those things don't change. They, by necessity, you know, maybe alter the brain, and maybe the brain's a bit plastic around that sort of thing, memorizing telephone numbers. But I think emotionally, as human beings, we still feel, and I don't believe that changes. I believe fundamentally, you know, feelings are always there. We need to belong. You know, we need to love. We're very social animals. We need to feel valued or useful or productive, and we need to, you know, we get angry. How many people are yelling in the car, you know, at other traffic, just because, you know, they're feeling frustrated. So frustration, it doesn't matter how sophisticated we become from a technology, you know, perspective, those fundamental human drivers and needs are always going to be there. So that's always going to be a sort of highway into the core of being human. I was interviewing some guys this morning who are really interesting because they work with sound. And the story was, I think the headline I used was, "What does a hamburger sound like?" And that was one of their assignments. They had to add music and sound to a hamburger so that people could have this culinary experience through music while they were eating their hamburger. That was their assignment. They called it a sound design studio, and they won an Emmy award for their work. I think the documentary was called Clouds Over Cuba. And so they're really interesting people, but, you know, they talk about playing with things. They talk about being curious. They talk about, you know, asking questions that seem quite bizarre. In other words, what does a hamburger sound like? And so the interesting thing that came out of this story is that music is a shortcut straight into the emotions. You know, and I sort of added this into the research I did afterwards. You know, when you hear a song, a certain song, doesn't it take you right back instantly 20, 30 years to a moment that you remember with absolute clarity? And only music manages to really do that. Whereas if you try and think back to the holiday on your own, to remember some or other details, it's very difficult. So, but music seems to have that ability to unlock those memories. And so in the same way, you know, music unlocks memories and emotions. emotions are a shortcut towards making us feel, and out of feeling and emotion comes change. And that's where winning hearts and minds is so important, because people are only changed or moved to change when they have an emotional experience. You sort of see people who have near-death experiences go on, very many of them go on to live transformed lives, because they had such a, it wasn't because they were about to die, it was because of all the emotions that this, was a storm of emotions that moved them to change. Realizing what's going to happen to my kids if something happens to me, or, I've got all these things I wanted to do, I'm never going to get a chance to do them now. So emotion in itself, being sick isn't in itself going to change anything. It's the emotion related to being sick that brings about the change in the thinking and the insights.
I don't know if this is showing me writing, but that's me writing my book as you talk. So but this might be a case study of how you write a book as well. I have a chapter titled called just randomly "What Does a Hamburger Sound Like?" People like that are sort of really pushing the sort of boundaries and just being curious. They're just and I'm hearing these themes, and one is curiosity. In a place of genuine curiosity. I'm hearing about emotion. And one of my takeaways is this: that change comes from a feeling. If I, one of the things I do is interview execs without agenda, which is different to interviewing execs because I want them to buy some project management or an ERP system or something. Yeah. And be able to genuinely ask what are the issues, their biggest issues facing them. A lot of the surveys are talking about organizations that their ability to change is their key strategic corporate imperative. It's the essence of them, is their ability to adapt and change. But you just spoke about emotion, that we change through emotion. And there's not much emotion in the corporate environment. No. Or, in fact, when it does appear, it's typically stifled. Is that your experience? Yeah, I think so. The fact is, though, most talented people leave because they don't feel valued. Yeah, and that's a feel, isn't it? Yeah, they leave because they don't feel like they're achieving anything. Those are all feelings. Whereas in this, we've got this culture, and this corporate culture in the Western world that expressing your emotions or feeling things is bad, so we don't talk about it. But that leads us to, and that's fine if that makes you happy. But it also leads to us not talking about it, not dealing with it in front of other people. Everybody's just expected to bury how they feel, and nobody buries how they feel. It comes out in some way, shape, or form, whether it's yelling at the traffic on the way to work, or kicking the cat when you walk in the front door at the end of the day. You can't take emotion out of things like transformation, and there's a lot of talk about vision and being adaptable and understanding technology, and but none of the, and all of these things are important, because I think vision is one of the things that can stimulate emotion in people. But there's very little talk about sort of how the feelings of people are dealt with. And in some ways, maybe it's sort of saying, well, this restructure is going to sort of, we have to do it, and that means all of these people are going to go. So these reactions and feelings are inevitable. Well, maybe that they are, but that doesn't mean that they should be ignored. They need to be dealt with in some way, shape, or form.
because if you can manage people through the emotional journey, you're going to be more agile. You're going to be managing the whole transformation a lot better than if you weren't. I sort of when I sort of speak, I talk a lot to marketing professionals and to leaders and managers, but I think this even applies to parents. How frustrating is it to try and get teens to do what you want to do? Whereas, sort of remembering that it's a mind and heart thing that you need to win on both fronts is going to help you, motivate your teens or influence your teens in the direction that you think is best for them. Just make sure that it is the best direction for them.
Yes, there's still a case for rationality as well, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, execs and CEOs and a lot of them are chartered accountants who still feel emotions, I think.
No, actually, I can tell you, except I'm not allowed to, that they do. And one of the reasons why I'm writing the Insights book is that my first book was called Calm, and it was aimed at a business audience. And I discovered it opened a lot of doors that people would quite freely talk about their emotional state and feelings. And when asked without agenda what was going on, then it really is feeling and emotion. And expressing their frustrations came emotionally. I mean, just for example, someone who was in charge of a very large construction organization said, I get calm and I appear calm. It's very important, but underneath I'm just a frantic mess. And of course, that's a personal admission that I can't spread, I can't tell the company, I can't do these things. In fact, people were basically, it said, don't tell anybody this. And so it was interesting to me that people are living in this emotional world, and they recognize it, and they're not allowed to express it.
And I think that inhibits, I mean, my area is communication. So to my mind, understanding is one of the 5 pillars I speak about in terms of winning hearts and minds. Understanding what people are feeling and making a point of understanding what people are feeling actually moves them towards, being more positive towards you, to feeling, valued and to be more inclined to get on board with whatever it is that that you want to do or want them to do. So, and I guess that's the same for the executive, understanding why he's, feeling why he or why she is, feeling what they are, is probably going to help them, if we can understand ourselves a bit better. We can maybe communicate with ourselves as well. It's not really an area, I've given too much thought or attention to, but, persuading ourselves to do things and moving ourselves to take action and sort of things probably would probably be easier if we understood how to win our hearts over as well.
No, I agree totally that, this starts with ourselves. And by the way, I gave you, when I said what the biggest business issues are, and I said it was ability to change, I was giving you the sanitized version, the acceptable Harvard Business Review.
Yes.
I should come clean on what they're really talking about. And I spent some time talking to CIOs and asking them what their biggest issues are. You want to guess?
People.
Well, the number one issue they found was their ability to influence the executive team. So as a CIO, it wasn't technology. And in a way, when we look at the intellect, yes, CIOs are adept at technology. That's a given. But their ability to influence, and the influence was from a positive point of view. You know, in this technological world, you know, technology is really, really important. So it wasn't that they had importance; it was thus the impact and what they were trying to do and how the organization could use it. So it was a very look, how do we communicate this effectively? And the second issue they had was the behavior of the executive team itself. And by the way, this is not CIOs. It's this very fundamental of how are we working together as a team. Yeah. And so then I asked in my true insightful fashion, well, what do you think is going on? Why can't teams communicate? What?
And yeah, that's probably because they use a PowerPoint presentation full of statistics and say, look, you know, we're heading for a sharp correction. We all need to act or we're going to hit the correction. And it's all about data and numbers and figures, and it's not dealing with the emotional, the heart.
And in other cases, you know, when I'm saying what's the issue with the team, and it was connection, which what can I say? Which is quite an admission, isn't it? And quite a human need. And interesting that they weren't talking about performance or goal setting or strategy or all those useful things that will appear in Harvard Business Review. It was their day-to-day experience and wanting to connect. And this went through all levels of the organization. So your typical techno CIO who's supposed to be unfeeling and unemotional, I said, so why do you think that people have so much difficulty in connecting? And he said, I think it's because everyone likes to hold on to their own thoughts, that they define themselves through their thoughts. I'm going, why, you can attend a million mindfulness courses about thinking, but to have this come out in a conversation over a period of about 20 minutes, to me, was astounding.
I also think that, yes, certainly, it's sort of, understanding yourself and understanding your emotional drivers and why you're doing what you're doing, and the reasons for it. But I think more important is to understand the other person, to understand the position that they're coming from, if you want to influence them. It's not, they're not going to be moved so much about what's going on with you as they're going to be moved by what's going on with them. So from a communications and persuasion and influence perspective, and it's about understanding the other person. That's sort of, one of those 5 principles, or I guess 5 values that I talk about in the book, and getting to their place of understanding them is really important, if you want to change their behavior and influence their behavior. Understanding yourself is important to changing and influencing your own behavior. Influencing maybe gets a bad rap because it sounds like not such a positive word, but the reality is we all live by influencing other people, to do stuff. In the past, influence with our kids was, don't do that, or if you don't, you're going to get a spanking. Well, that's persuading them to do something. There's just another form of persuasion and influence. We'll buy this stuff or use these services. That's all trying to influence people to do things. And if you're coming from a perspective where it's about you, then it's not a good thing. But if it's coming from a perspective about them and understanding them and what's good, best for them, then it's a good thing. So yeah, I think the the way to changing people's behavior and influencing them is understanding them and sort of and what's good for them first and foremost, and that's how you connect. I think more than any other way.
Yes, in a earlier interview, I was with Dorothea Brandon. So she does a heartfelt communication. So basically, working with execs, the sense of connection. So to allow them to operate from their heart. And she had an interesting exercise, which was if you're in conflict with someone, she did a role play where you were that person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, putting your, walking a mile in the other person's shoes, isn't it?
Yeah, so at least when they wake up, that you're a mile away.
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, that's an old joke. But what I heard was, look, make it personal. Or I was going to elaborate on it, but no real need. That you are. We talked about trite, didn't we? The trite word was acknowledge your feelings.
Yeah.
But actually, that's trite. But there is something else about acknowledging their feelings, truly. So putting yourself in their shoes. And she said, you feel what they do.
Yes.
So a very, very powerful exercise. And the other thing I'm getting from this is the power of distraction, isn't it? The question.
Distract them while you walk a mile in their shoes.
Well, whatever. We're saying we're set in our thinking. So when you ask someone, what does a hamburger sound like?
Yeah, if we're sort of bringing it back to insights, sometimes reframing something or changing direction quite suddenly, and being, it kind of brings. It's not maybe distraction plays a role, but it's about being curious as well. Sometimes it's good to be a bit of a magpie and change course or change tack in the conversation. As a journalist, that's quite effective for keeping the momentum of the conversation going, keeping interest up by moving, in different directions, so that you piquing curiosity and interest in a whole lot of different things. But it can also, force people to switch gears, change the direction of the interview, change the tone and the tempo. And I think, the same comes from insights, is being able to follow a line of thought, because very often we go in with a process. So use an interview for an example. We'll have a set of questions, and we've got these questions, and we're going to ask these questions, and off we go. Whereas to my mind, having a set of questions is just there as backup. You might need the first 2 or 3 questions to get the conversation going, but then it becomes about being interested in the conversation and what people are saying, because I think insight comes to that. So you might say something and then you go, oh, I'm quite interested in that. What did you mean by this? And then you sort of move off, be prepared to move off in another direction instead of having a set agenda. It depends on the conversation. If you were looking at media interviews where the interviewer has an agenda, and that might be to take a politician to task, then you're not looking so much for insight, and you're not looking so much for connecting with that person or learning things. You're just there to sort of nail them, basically, and then you drive. But even in that circumstance, people are looking for the other party to say something, even if it's in their body language or the way they look, and then to latch on to that and to go in that direction. So it is about, I think insight comes from being very engaged in the other person, watching them, listening to them, being curious about them, being interested in them and what they have to say. So, and, maybe turning things a bit on their head. A friend of mine was sort of saying to me yesterday that I'm a bit of a contrarian. because I like to turn things over and change the tack or challenge some things. Yeah. So even being a devil's advocate, I think, can lead to insights for both parties sometimes, if that makes any sense.
It's time to wind up this interview, and this is, like a job interview. They say, and do you have any last questions? And oh, right, this is my chance to ask the really good question, isn't it? But what is it? I'll
often say to them, do you have any last comments or thoughts that we've left out, that we haven't covered, that you're really burning to get out and get across? And sometimes, people can sort of start saying, oh, I just wanted to say this, and then they go on for the next half an hour. So, I think we came to this talking, I guess, about insights and what leads to them. And to my mind, it is about being curious. It is about having an open mind, and applying it to a problem. If you want to get the most out of an insight. I think though, if sometimes you have the eureka after the situation, and in retrospect or in hindsight, and we can learn from that, obviously, and grow from that. But you can also take insights into the now and the current, and, you have a problem. So go to the most random places possible, and look for, it reminds me of a really interesting creativity exercise that I learned from, I can't remember his name. He wrote the sort of, I think he wrote a book around Three Hats or something.
Oh, Edward de Bono.
Edward de Bono, yeah. So he, I did a lecture with him, and he told us to get out the dictionary, and he said, okay, I'm going to give you a problem, and that problem is, let's just say tourism. You need to come up with a tourism campaign, or a tourist product, or let's say a tourism type product to get more. You want to get more tourists. That's the problem. Here's a dictionary. Open the dictionary and put your finger down on a word. Any word, it has to be random. You don't choose it. You just put your finger down on that word. And whatever that word is, you need to use that to resolve your problem. And my fingers found the word podgy. And it was like, tourism and podgy, and then the sort of idea that came out of that was a resort called Podgy Beach, where fat people could go and hang out and not be judged, and have golf carts take them down to the beach if they wanted, and ice cream, just a beach of total indulgence, open only to podgy people. And so, doing a random exercise like that, and just changing your own thinking, startling yourself, I think, can lead to insights as well.
Wow. I don't know if that will make it into the book or not. For the example, but podgy beach, I'm not sure.
I thought it had so much potential.
Oh yeah, I could see. I'm just trying to work out how you're going to sell it, Like, no one likes to be called podgy.
We have to, what's in the name? Always change the name.
That's true. Well, thanks, Colin. It's great. And what's it like to be interviewed, for a change?
Yeah, it is a bit different. It's usually me asking the question. So yes, it's a bit harder than I thought it would be.
But it's hard for me because I'm not a professional interviewer.
It was good. Thank you. You did fine.
You never know. After my 100 interviews, you never know.
Well, yeah, no. I mean, I think you're naturally curious, and you let the other person talk. You're not, a bad interviewer is somebody who wants to get all of their opinions across, and talk about themselves. And,
I can do that.
Sorry?
I can do that.
You leave the spaces, and you'll sort of say something, but you'll just put it out there for the person to pick up on or not.
Yeah.
So
I'm finding a balance. I mean, one of the things I know about insight that people say is that if you want to generate, you need to ask a question.
Yeah.
But of course, we all got things we want to say as well. So
yeah. Well, sometimes questions aren't. It isn't just a question. Sometimes it might be making a statement. Making it, challenging the person to take that or leave it, or to build on it. So questions aren't just questions. You do say some things, express an opinion, and either the other person agrees or disagrees, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I'm having an insight. Thank you. Which is so there needs to be a reason behind the question or a purpose. So if the purpose is to get an answer or a deeper, then that's okay. And that can be achieved in any number of ways. It can be achieved in a statement, can't it? It
can be, yeah. I mean, you think of some of the, I don't know how much time you spend down at the pub or over a glass of,
on Podgy Beach.
Yes. But you think of some of the most interesting conversations you've had. They've been where you're sitting with a friend and you're talking about something and you both expressing your opinions and the other person's expressing, their opinion. And it's actually really interesting. It's a really engaging conversation. It might even be, move into the realm of debate. But that's a good interview. You're just interviewing somebody, and that's how I think of interviews as conversations.
Well, thanks, Colin. It's always interesting, and I never know what we're going to talk about. And I thought I was going to extract all the secrets of interviewers and how they generally went for insights. And truth is, I have somewhere along the way. So it's really interesting stuff, and you might see some of your things in print, so that's good.
Yeah, be curious and be opinionated.
Oh wow, I got to write that down now too. That makes me feel so better. Thank you. What am I going to do? I'm going to run the little banner at the end if this actually makes it to YouTube, and information where you can get hold of Colin, his upcoming book and what he's doing, and information on the Insights book as well, and how you can see how we're going, and if you want to contribute, so I'll run that after I close this off. So Colin Kennedy, thank you very much.
It's excellent. Thank you, Mark.